creating SQL queries to pull the data we care about from our tables, from our database tables that we've created already. And so in order to do that, I have a sample little concept here. It's going to be a web store. So this is my online store. This is the data that I have input into my website. So you can see I've got several tables here. I've got a customers table, I've got a products table, I've got an orders table, I've got this product orders, but we're going to ignore that for now. So hopefully this makes sense, right? Customers have first name, last name, addresses, email, username, and passwords. Products have product names, prices, and quantities in stock. And then we have orders, and orders have dates created, dates shipped, a status, the customer ID of who made that order, and then the total cost of that order, okay? And so I'm just going to use this as an example to help us understand how to build queries for the things that we care about. So what we're focusing on today is the server side. This is a server-side script, so when you see server.js, that's the file that we're going to work on. So you should have that file, and you'll have most of what I have in here. What's new today is what you see here, sample SQL queries that I want you to modify for your particular project. And we're going to go through what each of these means, and hopefully that'll help you have a good understanding of how SQL works and how you can use it in your particular project. So let's delve in. All right. This first query is an example of pulling all of the data out of a single table, right? And so the way that we would do that is use the command select. Hopefully that's familiar from this SQL tutorial that you did earlier. Use that as a reference if you want to learn more about SQL or have a better understanding. But that's what we're starting with here. We're selecting. Select is the command to pull data from a database in SQL. Star means all columns. So all of the columns in a particular table. And then we say from the table we care about. And in my case, I'm pulling all my data from the products table. And again, products table, that's a specific table that I made in my database earlier, right? So you would want to replace that with a table that you have made in your database earlier, right? When we did our create table. Okay, so I want to select all of the information from my products table. And what I'm doing here is I'm just creating a variable to hold that string. So I would suggest, all the commands that you want to do, you just create a variable for them so that you have them and you can run them using the variable whenever you want to. So how do we run this command, this query, this full table query? Well, a little bit below, I've added this portion of code, which is an access point into our website that I'm calling query test. You would really call this anything you want to, but this is just to test to make sure these queries are working correctly. And let's make this the one I want to run, which is full table query. So you have access to this. I'll show you how to get to it in REPL, but you can copy and paste this and then modify it for your needs. But what this app.get does, again, it just creates an ending point for our URL. So if we add /querytest to our website URL, it'll take us to this code, which is a server-side script, which runs a database query and gives us all the information back. This variable query is just the query I want to run, and I'm just sort of temporarily setting it to each of the ones that I want to show you. So here I'm sending it to the full table query, which we defined above as selecting all the data from the products table. This next line, DB is our database. All means give me all of the data that matches the query all at once. Query is the query I want to run, which is just defined here in line 40. And then error here is if there's an error, it's going to store that in there and have that pop up. Hopefully there won't be any errors. Rows is where all the data from the query is going to be put into, right? It's going to come back. Okay, so what's this going to do? It's going to run the query, store all the result in rows, and then down here, we're producing this RES is short for response. So we have a request and we have a response. And this is a standard way of doing this in the JavaScript library we're using. So we're saying, give me the response as a JSON object, which you're familiar with a little message here saying it was successful, and then storing the rows of data in this data field. Okay, so you don't need to change anything except basically the query you want to run. And again, this is only meant to test these queries so that when you go to use them for real, you know they already work. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run this. Stop it. I'm going to run. Okay. And then in order to see it, we can't really edit this. What we want to do is open it in a new tab. So come over to the far right and click open in a new tab. And let's move this down a little bit. At the end of the URL for your website, type a slash and then query test. And it will direct us to the server-side script, which will run that database query. And look at that. There's all our data. We had a successful query. Here's the data. I'm pulling everything from my product table. So there's an ID field that's automatically produced. Product name is hoodie. Price is $35.99. Quantity in stock is 34. If I check my website data and I look at the products table, I see there's hoodie, $35.99, quantity in stock 34. And so that's great. That matched. And all of my products are in there. Looks pretty good. Okay. And so that worked. I feel good about that. Every single one of my products and all of the columns are present here correctly. Okay, so that's the first kind of most simple query we can run, I would say, is selecting basically all the data from a given table. That's typically not what we want to do. We want to be more selective about the data we're looking at, and so we need to write some more advanced kinds of queries. And so I'll just show you some examples of doing that. Again, you'll want to change this to suit your needs. Sometimes I only want maybe a single column from a table, right? So that's really similar to the first query, but instead of selecting star, I'm going to change star to the column I want, right? And this column name has to match exactly a column name that you have in your table, right? So I'm saying select last name from the customers table. And I can do that because in my website data, in my customers table, I have a last name column, okay? And so that's a valid column name. I can call any one of these column names. Make sure that you're doing it exactly as you see it, right? Spelling wise, underscores, capitalization, make sure you're consistent for that to work. If I want to run this particular query, I would just come down to my query test, and instead of running full table query, I would change this query to one column query. I would stop the app. I would run it again to update that. I would go to open in a new tab. And again, I would add at the end of that query test. And there you see, right, this time it's pulling just the last names of my customers from the customer table. Okay, so this is a way to be more particular about the data we're pulling. I invite you to pause the video at any point if you want to slow it down so that you can take a longer look at things. Okay, so that's one column. You can also select more than one column specifically. So multiple columns query, I did one here where I'm selecting product name and the price from the products table. So I'm still dealing with just one table, but I'm pulling more than one column from that, and I just separate those column names with a comma, right? I'm not going to show you that one because I think that's pretty self-explanatory, just to let you know that that's what that does and how to do that. More interestingly is when we want to select data based on conditions that data satisfies. And that's this next one, where query. So we use a where clause to narrow down data so that it fits certain parameters, right? Certain conditions. And so in this case, I am saying select the product name and the quantity in stock from the products table, but where the quantity in stock is less than 10. So maybe I'm trying to identify products that I need to order more of to get more in stock, right? And so let's look at that. So again, if I want to be more particular about the data I'm pulling, I use the where clause, and then I specify a condition on that. And there are lots of different kinds of conditions we can specify here. Like we could say equal to, if it's a string column, we can do different kinds of things. If you need help with that, you can let me know. You can specify between values, all different kinds of things you can do in a where clause. But let's look at that and see what happens. So I'm going to come down to my query test. I'm going to run the where query instead of old one. I'm going to stop. I'm going to run again. Make sure you do that each time you make a change. I'm going to open in a new tab. I'm going to go to query test. And there we go. I've got jacket, quantity in stock 7. Good. Sweatpants, quantity in stock 0. Knit beanie, quantity in stock 9. And umbrella, quantity in stock 0. So that seems to be successful. If I looked back at my table, I do see, yeah, umbrella 0, jacket 7, sweatpants 0, knit beanie 9. So that seems good. And it's successfully pulling the right data based on the quantity in stock. Okay. Now again, this data doesn't look good, right? We wouldn't want to present this data in this format to anybody using our website. But I want you to realize we're just focusing on the server side right now. So we're looking at specifically server-side scripts. Once we're sure that we're able to execute the server-side scripts to produce the data we want, then we'll shift over to the client side and talk about presenting that data and how we take this and show it to the customer in good-looking and meaningful ways, right? But if you're wondering about that, just realize we're not going to be seeing it this way. This is just a test to make sure that we can do what we need to do on the server side. Okay, so there was our where query. And then lastly, one more. So far, all the queries I've looked at have been on a single table, right? The last one was on products. We did one on customers. But oftentimes, many of you have multiple tables that are linked together in some way. And it's very typical that we'll want to pull data from more than one table simultaneously based on kind of complicated conditions. And so I want to show you an example of that so you know it's possible, and then you can modify this to do what you need to do and ask me if you need help with that. But this last one, it's called a join. When you're trying to get data from more than one table, you use what's called a join. We're going to select data from both the customers table and the orders table. And I want to find basically all of my orders where the total is more than 50 and tell me who's making those orders. So maybe I care about like who are my big customers, right? Who are the customers that are placing big orders? Because maybe I want to market to them in some certain more aggressive way to keep them ordering, because that's where I'm getting a lot of revenue from. So I'm identifying orders greater, where the total cost was more than $50, and I want to know who the first name and last name of that customer was, and the order status, right? Are these people returning items, or are they good, legit orders? So that's what we got here. And actually, let's add orders.total to make sure that that's coming out correct. So let's look at the particulars of this query. When I'm pulling from more than one table, it's not enough to specify just the table column. I have just the column name. I have to specify the table that's in, right? So I'm saying here, I want the last name from the customers table. And the way you do that is you say customers dot last name. So you just have to specify the table name dot the column name when you're doing a join like this. Notice in the previous queries, we didn't specify the table names because we were only pulling from one table, and SQL is smart enough to know to look in that table for that particular column name. But when we have more than one column name, we have to specify, hey, the last name is in the customers table. So customers.last name, customers.first name, orders.status. So I'm pulling the status from the orders, and orders.total. From, now here's where it gets a little more complicated. We're not pulling just from one table. We're pulling from two tables combined. And the way that we say that is orders inner join customers. Now there's different ways of doing joins. I think for most of us, we probably almost maybe all the time want to do inner joins. So I would just say inner join. I think you can also just say join without the inner, and it's going to assume an inner join. Don't worry about what inner join means, but just realize we're combining two tables. So I'm combining the orders tables and the customers tables, but in a certain way. How does SQL know how to combine those tables? Well, there's a field, a column that's sort of common to both of these tables, and it's the customer's ID field. So every customer has an ID, and every order has a customer ID that's identifying which customer placed that order. So again, if we look at the data here, I've got these customers. I don't see the IDs because they're generated automatically, but there's customer 1, customer 2, customer 3 as we go down. And if you look at the orders, there's a customer ID column that specifies which customer that is. Now, I can't see the names in the order column, but that's okay because that's linked to the customer column, and I'm not storing those names in more than one place. So, oh, this first order was placed by customer 4. Who's customer 4? Well, if I wanted to know that myself, I'd have to go back to customers and say, okay, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that's Ben Zhang, okay? I think that's customer 4. But the database can do that for me, and that's the point of the join. So we come over here, and it's going to join those tables on customer ID equals orders.customer ID. And again, I want orders where the total was greater than 50, so I'm combining that now with a where clause to narrow down the data. It's kind of a lot. If you have questions about that, certainly ask me. But this is a more typical, like most complicated kind of query that you will run. So I'm going to run this query, join with where query. So let's do that. Join with where query. Again, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to run it again. It's connected. It's good. I'm going to open a new tab. I'm going to go to query test. And lo and behold, here we go. Last name Deason, first name Kristen, status complete, total 84. Great. So here was an order that was $84 placed by Kristen Deason. And then, of course, I have these other ones. Here's another one from Elise Anderson, complete, $109.95, okay, et cetera, et cetera. Looks like most of these are good. Oh, here's one that's returned. Adam Smith, 63.48. Okay, so I can, again, look at my data here and say, okay, did I have an order like that? Okay, here's one, 63.48. Yep, it was placed by customer ID 3. And even though Adam Smith is row number 1 here, he was added third to the database. Maybe I might have modified my my JSON at some point. So he's actually customer 3, and there you go. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at here. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Again, that's kind of complicated, but that's what I want to focus on this part of the video is the server-side stuff and pulling those queries. So ask me for help as you're doing this, but take this stuff and modify it to your needs. Think about the data and the kind of pages you're going to want to show and what kind of queries you're going to need to get that data. That's it.